Alright, today we're going to be changing strings on an acoustic guitar with me, Mr. Mo. The first thing you need to know is not all acoustic guitars are the same. This is a classical guitar and it uses nylon strings. Putting steel strings on this would be disastrous. It could tear apart the guitar, so don't do that. This one is a steel string acoustic guitar. This is what we're going to change the strings on today. So here are the things that you're going to need. This thing right here, a string winder, a 10mm socket, something to cut wires with, a cloth to wipe off the dust on your guitar, some strings, obviously. This next part is optional. Some quadruple-aught steel wool and some painter's tape. You'll see why in a second. Here's a picture of everything. By the way, that thing is called a peg puller. It pulls the pegs out of an acoustic guitar so you can change it. All right, the first thing you're gonna do is grab that string winder and loosen all of the strings. You're not gonna have an easy time trying to pull those pegs out if the strings are tight, so that's the first thing that you wanna do. You don't have to loosen them all the way off because the pegs will come out and the strings will all come out at the same time. All right, now you're gonna grab that peg puller. Back when I was a kid, I would use a fork to do this, and that is an awful idea because your mom will be mad because you ruined a fork and your guitar will be scratched off. So this peg puller costs like $2 at a music store. You should get one. It slides onto the peg and then you just lift straight up. Remember, you have to have the strings loose, otherwise it can be hard to pull out. Then you just grab all your strings, lift straight up so you don't scratch your guitar. Then go to the headstock here and just start unwinding each string. Then you just do whatever you do with old strings. You throw them away or make jewelry, I guess. So take your cloth and wipe off all the dead skin cells and all the gross stuff that's accumulated under those strings over the last few months or weeks or however long you keep your strings on. By the way, it's recommended depending on how much that you play. If you are someone who plays every single day, once those strings start to look grimy, that's the time to change them. Take your 10mm socket and tighten up each tuning post. These will get loose over time. Now remember, you don't want to use a wrench. You just want them to be finger tight. That's all you need. The next thing that you're going to want to do, and this is optional, is you're going to want to lubricate this part of the guitar. This part of the guitar is called the nut. And the strings go through this, and if the strings get stuck in this part of the guitar, it can make tuning a nightmare. So you can take the graphite from a pencil, or you can use this lubricant that I use. It's really great, and the bonus part of using a lubricant is it's not the color of a pencil. Sometimes the pencil color is kind of ugly on a guitar, but it works great, so don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with using graphite from a pencil. Then you just put all of that stuff in between each little slot on the nut of your guitar. Then you go over to your bridge and saddle of your guitar. Now I use a pencil for this part because it's easy. This is another common place that your strings will break on a guitar. So put a little bit of graphite on there so when the strings are vibrating, they're less likely to break. Because when strings vibrate, they actually spin in a circle and they kind of rub back and forth on that. And over time, they can break. Now this part is totally optional, but it does make playing your guitar much better. You're gonna take your painter's tape and you're gonna put it over the fretboard, but leaving exposed the little metal fret in between. And you're gonna take your steel wool, this is quadruple-aught 40, and you're just gonna scrub it and get rid of all the dirt and grime that's on the frets of your guitar. You wouldn't think about it, but these things get super dirty and super gross over time. See right here is the dirty ones, and as you go to the left, these are the ones that I've cleaned. Not only does it make playing your guitar easier, it looks good too. And anytime your guitar is easier to play, you're gonna practice more. All right, so let's start putting on some strings. So you're gonna take the end of the string and then a peg, and you're gonna put the end of the string down that hole and push the peg down with the open side of the peg facing towards the headstock of the guitar. Then you're gonna bring the string down to your headstock, and you're gonna wanna make sure you leave yourself enough slack. Now I have a pretty big hand, so I kinda do a little karate chop to have enough string, but people's hands are different sizes, so you've gotta figure out the best way to do this. get your tuning peg turned so it's kind of at an angle, so that when the string goes through there, you've got an angle to make it not slide out right away. Now remember, give yourself enough slack. You want to go around this tuning peg 2 times. You're going to give it a bend, and then with your other hand, you're going to hold that string in place while you start winding it. For the big strings, also known as the wound strings, you want these to go around the tuning pegs about 2 times. 3 maybe at the most. For the smaller strings, you want to go around the peg, or the tuning peg, 3 times, 4 times at the most. If you don't do it enough, the string will slide out and you gotta replace it. If you do it too many times, it's gonna make tuning an issue because the strings will kind of slide around. Because just like anything, a string needs to stretch, and that little part around there is enough to detune your guitar quite a bit. Then you're gonna take some wire clippers and just cut off the excess. I hate it when people just coil them up at the top because you're just gonna scratch your guitar up. So cut them off. Then you're gonna do the same thing with all of your strings, and remember that the wound strings, the bigger strings, those need to go around that tuning post at least 2 times. If you don't do it enough, the string is going to slide out. If you do it too much, it's going to be really hard to keep in tune. Perfect. Also, when you're doing this, you're going to want to make sure that you don't tighten these strings up too much, just enough that they'll stay there. There are some people who believe that you should start with the middle strings and then work outwards. I do that sometimes, but I don't think it makes as big a deal as some people say. Some people say that you start in the middle and work outwards because if you start on one side, it puts uneven pressure and can do damage to the neck. But I've just never run into that, so I can't tell you if that really happens or not. But to prevent it, I make sure that when I tighten these strings, I don't tighten them so much that it's putting a lot of extra pressure on the neck. I only make them tight enough that they stay there. Depending on the size of your strings, these last 2 are the ones that are going to only go around your tuning posts 3 times because they are not wound. And what I mean by wound is, you'll see it when you see the string. The small strings are just one thin piece of wire. The big strings are a thin piece of wire with another piece of wire wound around it. That's why it's called a wound string. If you're interested, there is Martin Company actually has a way that they prefer that you put your strings on, where they say it locks better. To tell you the truth, I've never come across it being a problem to do it the way that I do. My strings don't slip and everything stays in tune. But it's a good thing to do. A lot of times when I put my strings on there, I do that. But since this video is more for someone who's just beginning to put strings on, I can tell you when I first started trying to do it the way Martin says to, I ruined a couple strings doing it. And when you buy your first set of strings to put on your guitar for the first time, it's not a bad idea to have a backup set of strings because it doesn't always go perfect, especially the first time you do it. Yeah, don't forget to clip off this. I don't know why, but it just annoys me when people have guitars and the strings are hanging off. Because it can do damage, it can scratch things. Now this is the part that young players really don't know about. After you put your strings on, you have to stretch them. Whether you play ukulele or guitar or electric guitar, you're gonna stretch the strings. And all you do is pull up on the strings. Now in this, I'm holding the camera with one hand, so you only see me pulling them up in one hand or in one spot. Usually I'll move up and down the fretboard and really stretch them out. And you're gonna do this a couple times. So after you put the strings on, you're gonna bring the guitar up to pitch, then stretch the strings. Then tune it again, then stretch the strings again, then tune it again, then stretch the strings again. Usually you've gotta do that about, 3 or 4 times before the strings will stay. And there you have it. Your strings are on there and you're ready to play some music. If you don't stretch your strings, then you're gonna have an issue with it staying in tune. So make sure you stretch the strings. All right, go practice, have a great day. And if you are just watching this video because you don't own a guitar, go buy one. They're super fun.